Are you turning healthy fruits into highly unhealthy fruits without even realizing it? Fruit can be one of the healthiest things you can put into your body, but the majority of Americans are guilty of making this single mistake that can counteract all of the health benefits of fruit. Some fruits can help with occasional constipation, reduce bloating, and even help burn calories. Others can wreak havoc on your digestive system and energy levels. In this viral presentation, world-renowned heart surgeon Dr. Stephen Gundry showcases the 3 fruits to stop eating today. Go to thehealthyfat.com/inspired or click on the link in the description box below to learn the top 3 common foods that are the cause of your fatigue. Eliminating these fruits could forever change the way we help increase energy levels, decrease brain fog, support digestion, and even lose weight. This video has been watched by over 20 million people to date, and you can watch and learn more about it at thehealthyfat.com/inspired.
We've got to have a laugh, mate. I tell you why. Because the world's freaking mad. It's like they're playing out a script.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to point out, again, that the global cult has no borders. And just because someone stands up proclaiming what should happen in relation to Iran, or as the leader, supreme leader of Iran, doesn't mean that they necessarily have their people's first interests at heart. Same with Netanyahu.
Yep.
And if people would just visualize a cult in the shadows, and coming down from that same cult, you hit all the different leaders, and that's why they kind of move as one unit. And part of the scam is to control all sides. They answer to a master.
Oh, yeah.
And Netanyahu answers to a master, to which these other characters like Cameron also answer. Another level of what's going on, which is that you've got these different religions. Well, they claim they're different anyway. They call themselves different names. And they all claim that their God is on their side.
Yep.
And they all have their own religious texts, like the Bible and the Quran, which they kind of follow and interpret it depending on how they want things to happen. And it's amazing how God is always on their side, and no matter what side they're on. And this religious division is very much at the heart of this in so many ways. First of all, this is Netanyahu quoting the Bible in support of bombing the innocent in Gaza.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for a war for our common future. Today, we draw a line between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. It is a time for everyone to decide where they stand. Israel will stand against the forces of barbarism until victory. I hope and pray that civilized nations everywhere will back this fight, because Israel's fight is your fight. Because if Hamas and Iran's axis of evil win, you will be their next target.
So Netanyahu's quoting his God, and then the supreme leader in Iran is quoting his God. So if we go on being led by a religious belief system that is unquestioned and unyielding, so that I am a Muslim, so I think this, and I, by definition, don't like you, and I am Jewish, so therefore this is what I believe, and I don't like you. You've got this schism, this built-in religious schism, which just goes on replicating itself. Yep. Whenever you look at religion, you're looking at a classic divide and rule. Because if you can get a group of people to believe one thing and a group of people to believe another vehemently, then bringing them into conflict is easy.
Yeah.
Hey, Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, it's John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free. The mantra of the Inspired live stream. Welcome on YouTube, Rumble, and X, and welcome in a live chat. Lots of familiar names and photos. It's wonderful to see you. I think there's a discussion already going on. I thought there was this is a little excerpt from David Icke's and Jamie Icke's dot connector from the iconic platform, iconic.com. And I thought this was a very, very on point segment by David Icke, who's on point usually. But it opens up a can of worms that we haven't really opened up in depth in this way. Uninspired, but we're opening a new chapter. We're starting a new chapter today. This is going to be a multiple part series. I don't know if it's going to be consecutive, but we're going to divide this up into multiple parts. And we're going to go where few people are willing to go. And I want to preface this by saying that I respect everyone's beliefs, no matter, as long as they don't harm anyone else. And that it is not my intention or our intention to attack anyone for their beliefs. We are simply doing what we always do, and that's what we've been doing in our lives, is following where the truth might lead us and not let our belief system get in the way of that. This means a lot of times that you have to question yourself. You have to question what you thought, everything. And this can be a painful process. But at the end of that process, there's the realization that you seek truth for truth's sake. There's no other particular benefit or outcome. Truth is truth. And the reward for truth is that you know and live the truth. That's it. That has to be enough. And we're in these times, and I've been saying this in private, and we've been having these discussions with other truth seekers and speakers, where in the next years and decades, every veil will be lifted. Every layer of the onion will be peeled, and people that have subscribed and put their entire life into a pre-designed belief system will have a great awakening. And it's now coming to the religions. This is becoming clearer and clearer. Since the beginning of the year, people en masse have been discovering certain facts about certain religions. But it's really one man that sort of opened a whole new chapter for me and in my research, and allows me to see things in a completely different way. So I want to start today discussing with you what I have learned so far about the Bible in a completely different light. And once again, just like the man that I'm going to talk about and whose book I'm going to reference today, I have no intention of harming or discriminating against anyone. This will probably shock the world when it becomes this worldwide phenomenon that it will, just like with all the other stuff that we're discovering. This too will eventually, like a wave, it will reach all the corners of the earth, and people will discover that what they thought they knew, what they were taught, and what they were indoctrinated to believe just might not be the truth. So let's look a little bit into this man here. Let me mix it a little bigger. Mauro Bellino, and an Italian scholar, researcher, and translator, officially commissioned translator by the Vatican. As I said, an author and translator who was commissioned by the Vatican to work as a translator. He translated various ancient Hebrew and Greek biblical texts. His translations focused on shedding light on the original meanings of these texts, often diverging from traditional interpretations. So the man is so proficient in ancient Hebrew and Greek and Latin that he was commissioned by the Vatican. And even though his findings were not favorable, by the way, not at all, to the Vatican or what they've been preaching and teaching, he has a lot of fans in his corner that appreciate his work from all religions, by the way, from Judaism, from Christianity, It's very interesting. But this man has been making waves for the past 10 to 14 years in certain circles, and now on a broader stage, he's becoming more and more known. And what he has discovered by reading the Bible, first of all, translating it properly, looking at the actual meaning of words, and by then reading it literal, rather than he's not disregarding other interpretations. He's just saying, I just want to provide a perspective that is literal. I'm reading it for what it is, not for what others have told me it could mean, not allegory, and not symbolism, but rather this is what I read verbatim. Okay, let's move on in this. His working method is characterized by two fundamental elements: reading and reporting what is written literally in that Hebrew code and pretending that what is written there is true. And much more concrete and much more fascinating interpretation emerges than what has been handed down to us over the centuries as an absolute and indisputable truth. This is the book. I got it here, by the way. I'll show you The Naked Truth, where he was interviewed by Giorgio Cataneo. And it's sort of it's a conversational book, and it goes back and forth between quoting him and referencing his other books and his other work. But I would recommend this great reading material, The Naked Bible. And so we're gonna go through this book here together in part today, because this is a multiple part series. Okay, so I want to read to you the first page of the first chapter of this book, because I think it's brilliant. It so brilliantly, summarizes what we do, even here at Inspired, right? And what if we were wrong? Good question. Wrong about what? About everything. Who we are, where we come from. Oh, well, what of it? We'll just turn our beliefs upside down, throw them away. We'll change our minds about almost everything. Will overturn our view of the world, of humanity, of the human adventure on Earth. Madness? Certainly not. It happens. It has happened before. It will happen again. When I first read this, I really had to sit with this, because this is literally the times that we find ourselves in, and it is, to me, sort of a beautiful synchronistic moment when somebody I've never met before, an author, a speaker, whatever. Literally, it's like the same words, the same thoughts, but this is what we're doing, right? And what if we could be brave enough to go further and further with this, so that we do not let our old beliefs, or that we do not let our conditioning get in the way? It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but this is what's required if we truly want to discover truth, and the fact that there is objective truth. As hard as it may be to define, but there is such a thing, okay? Thought this was a really, really beautiful opening. So here's what the Naked Bible sort of, in an overview, prefaces. It says there are different versions of the Bible in different countries. So pretty much anywhere you can travel in the world, if you pick up a Bible, you'll find it's probably a different version from the one you have at home, from the one that you're used to, or that you would find in other countries. Also, there are different interpretations of which books are valid and which aren't valid. This is partially what the different denominations in Christianity are about, how they deem certain books to be holy and important and others not so much, and how they interpret these books. So even within Christianity, there's multiple disciplines and denominations which see things vastly different. The interesting thing is that even though these Bibles, if you will, are often vastly different, the title is always the same. It's the Holy Bible everywhere. All versions available today are not the original version. That's also important to note, and that's what the author, or Bellino here, says often. Nobody has the original version of the Bible, and this is troublesome. Over the centuries and millennia, there have been changes and corrections and additions and subtractions. At least 11 books are missing, even though they're mentioned in the books that are included. So you're reading the Bible, and it references a book that is missing from the Bible, right? So these are all sort of things that most of us already kind of knew and were familiar with. So what is missing from the Bible? According to the author's findings, winged angels, metaphysical thought, soul, spirit, immortality, and the most shocking one, God himself is missing from the Bible. Bilinio says these are all absent words, non-existent concepts, and imaginative interpretations. And this naturally is like a it's like a punch in the face to almost any Christian. I get that. Now, I want to say that to me, it's a vastly different thought to think about the Bible, to think about the Christian belief systems, and to think about God, and to think about the Creator that I have absolute 100% knowing of the existence of a Creator, of an intelligent designer. There's no doubt about it. What we're discussing here is whether that designer is ever mentioned in the Bible, whether the original Creator, the way we would imagine him, her, it has been referenced in the Bible. And according to Mauro Bilinio, no, he wasn't. Not once. He hasn't found a single reference to God in the Bible. This is more than shocking. But if you go through the reasoning, the translations, the etymology of words, if you follow the reasoning and follow the breadcrumbs, you will find that it is a very logical conclusion. Not saying it's right or wrong. Neither can he, by the way. He's not pointing to whether it's right or wrong. He's just saying, I'm looking at the words, at what they mean, and I'm reading it as if it were a true account of history. That's what he's doing. So the Bible is a collection of books without any source. A sensational example is the book of Isaiah. It's really interesting. This greatest of the Hebrew prophets is believed to only have written the first part of the book, 39 chapters. The second part, added much later, was attributed by convention to Deutero-Isaiah, who would have written chapter 40 to 55, 2 centuries after. I'm sorry for the typos in here. And Trito-Isaiah would have completed the rest of the book, 66 chapters in total. This is very interesting. And Bilinio says, but despite all this, the volume was permitted to be called the Book of Isaiah, as if it were the work of a single author, always the same one, the greatest of the Old Testament prophets. This is not an uncommon story, by the way, according to him in the Bible, that you will find that a particular book has been attributed to one author, but if you really study the work, you will find that it had been written over decades or centuries, clearly by different people, even in different languages or dialects. Where you go, every analytical scholar can tell you this when you analyze the work, but in Bible study, in Bible teachings, and in church, it's always presented as if this is Moses, this is Isaiah. And it's very interesting when you go into the depths and find out chronologically, this often would have been impossible. And this shows that the book of Isaiah was written over the span of more than 200 years by apparently 3 people. Yep, somebody's honking the horn there. Simply put, Bilinio says, the Bible in many respects is just a photocopy of the Sumerian Akkadian origin stories classics. The Atrahamus, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering some of these words, the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh, the birth of our species, the Great Flood, and other stories were already all contained in those texts, which the biblical writers would certainly have read. This is something that I was familiar with because scholars of other ancient texts, not religions, ancient texts, have, of course, spoken about the floods, and of course, people that have looked at the vast body of ancient work are making those connections, are finding the patterns. Not least Archaics is doing that. Finding the patterns and the repetitious cycles and the resets. So, is it possible? And this is probably the main question in this book that is being asked over and over again. Is it possible that the Bible does in fact recount historical truth? Bellino says the biblical account is coherent. Of course, it often appears to us as shocking and difficult to digest, but it is a perfectly logical and credible account. We're talking essentially about a war story describing terrifying confrontations and family feuds. Yahweh regularly commands his people, the sons of Jacob of Israel, to exterminate their adversaries. And so, especially, of course, pertaining to the Old Testament, which is wherever you open the Old Testament, it's a pretty brutal thing. It's a pretty brutal account, actually. Yahweh's provisions are cruel. And if you open, or if you go to any, before I read this, if you go to any Bible study today, if you listen to any preacher, then when you will ask, well, who is Yahweh? And they will say, well, that's God. That's the name for God. There is no direct translation, but that's the interpretation, that Yahweh is God, right? And according to the Bible, Yahweh's provisions are cruel. Take no prisoners, kill everyone. Spare none, neither the elderly nor the women, sometimes with one exception, little girls. It was enough for them to be 3 years and a day old to be considered sexually attractive. This is all taken from the Bible. There's no embellishment, no interpretation here, okay? We got to pull this up here. So the question again, what happens if we pretend that what is written in the Bible is the literal truth? Which, of course, in church, you don't hear that. You say some things are, some things aren't, some things are an analogy, some things are fables, some things are just symbolic stories to teach something. Simple. If the Bible were truth, Bellino says, you realize that this set of books recounts something very precise. The appearance of superior non-human beings who genetically manufactured Homo sapiens, and that there were many of them, and they were technologically advanced. Now, whether they're extraterrestrial or not, Bellino cannot answer with any certainty. He says it's impossible to answer, and perhaps our interpretation of extraterrestrial must be questioned as well. But let's just stick with this. This is what a scholar, a translator, a historian that is he's well respected, even, as I said, even within the circles of the Vatican, quoted often by biblical scholars. It's very interesting. And he says that if you read the Bible literally, we are a genetically manufactured species. That Homo sapiens was created, and of course we've heard this before, just not so directly connected to the Bible. And oftentimes, if you talk about this in Christian circles, this all is sort of like, we don't really want to see it that way, because Yahweh's God. But is he really? We're going to get to that too. And who are the Elohim? Who are these Elohim who apparently created Homo sapiens? Let's move forward here. Who is Yahweh? The biblical texts describe him with two words, male and warrior. He only cares about his people, which are not even the Jews as a whole, but merely a part of them, the descendants of Jacob, Israel. So it's just that part of the Jews that are Yahweh's people. To them, this Yahweh warrior character makes a solemn promise. He would give them a vast dominion which would extend from the Nile to the Euphrates Valley and even beyond. The map of greater Israel, as we find it oftentimes today, and as it is now the colonial, if you will, the dream, the imperialistic dream of the current regime in Tel Aviv. But this whole story of the chosen people, chosen by whom, for what purpose, and are they inherently the same people as the Adamites? There are so many interesting questions that he is seeking to answer. And what I love about this guy here is that he says, I don't answer anything. What he says is, all I do is read it, and I pretend that what I read is true. And if I do that, I come to certainly very different conclusions than religions would want me to come to. What's going on here? My bad. Okay. So in this book, he goes, or in this book, both the interviewer and Mauro Bellini, they go into these power structures, and they seek to make connections to our current situation that we find ourselves in, and how the Bible relates to that. And of course, that's what many scholars do, and many people do. They look at the Bible and say, yeah, it's all there, Revelation, look at this, it's all playing out. But they do it in a different way. He does it in a different way. He says, those who have power manage the knowledge, and again, forgive my typos, that we believe we have about our past. The same thing is true for ancient texts, and it is true for the construction of religions, which are based on a certain dogmatic interpretation of the writings from which they are derived, an interpretation from which one must not deviate, he says. This is, there's more packaged into this than what meets the eye. Number one, he's talking about the construction of religions, which means it's not something that was developed, it's not something that was received, it's not something that was sort of an epiphany, but it was a construction. That's A. The second thing is the dogmatic interpretation of the writings from which they are derived. And this is the interesting part, that, and we're going to get to this in a later part of this discussion, but according to him, all religions were not religions. They were not spiritual practices. They weren't talking about spirit or anything like that. They were ancient historic texts that described the history of the time, that were later, and I'm prefacing something that's coming maybe at the end of the week here, but that were later, almost at the same time, infused with spiritual language and metaphysical concepts, and the concept of an almighty God, of one God. And so all of this was added later to the religions, and coincidentally, pretty much at the same time all over the world. So these cultural texts and ancient texts were not religious texts as we would see them. They were historic texts. They described what was happening at the time, and only later were they altered to become spiritual texts. Okay, so Bellini references Mariano Rumor, a two-time Italian prime minister who wrote the book The Other Europe. This is also very interesting. It all connects. The book mentions a very peculiar esoteric tradition, one that is tied to the belief that the history of the human species on Earth is much older and arouses far more controversy than what is held by official science. There was, and perhaps still is, at a very high level and unknown to us, a group of people or an entity that worked and is still working on an important project for Europe and beyond. As for individual governments or political parties, they're completely excluded from what is called the Great Work, according to Rumor. And it goes further. You know, the project envisions that Europe and the rest of the world be governed by a moral leadership personified by some individuals belonging to branches of ancient nobility that have their roots in the distant past, partly of Jewish extraction. This group or entity goes back to the very dawn of civilization. Now, if you compare this to what we see in the world today, it's not too far-fetched, actually, isn't it? Is it? If you look at the development of North America, of Europe, even Australia, New Zealand in just the past 20 years, where it's become so obvious. What isn't so obvious is this hidden hand, this hidden entity that we refer to as the cabal or the dark forces, but that actually have been there since forever and have done this. According to Rumor, by the way, what he writes in his book, according to him, they've done this uninterrupted for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So no matter what played out on the world stage, according to him, there was always the hidden hand in the back, always controlling the narrative, controlling what was going on. So how exactly does this relate to Bellino's studies of the Bible? In the Bible, the Elohim who made humanity considered us more or less like a particularly evolved animal species, an animal species that could be used for their needs, as it had been rendered capable of understanding and carrying out orders of various degrees of complexity, especially the more the species was perfected by them, says Bellino. So here we have the story that some of you have heard, that we were not only manufactured, but we were manufactured to do specific things on this earth. And of course, others have speculated that we were manufactured as a mining species, because this entity or this other species, the Elohim, if you will, requires certain things that the earth provides, and they created us as a slave force, a labor force, and we were put here to do this. I think, you know, almost everybody agrees things kind of got out of hand, and orders were not followed properly. You know, not at least because different species started to mix, which wasn't part of the plan, and so we had a falling out between the Elohim, the chosen people, and the slave race, right? I mean, you look at the state of the world today, and you know this is not too far-fetched, right? But what the beautiful thing about this is, all of this here is simply what he reads in the Bible if translated properly and read literally. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, Yahweh says to the people he has chosen, "Thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee." Again, look at the world today. Who controls in the background, and not even that much in the background, who controls the money supply? Who controls the most important aspects of our society? In this section, Bellino points out the concept of an elite is introduced, one inserted amongst humanity in a dominant position. The priests of previous centuries and even millennia were not like the priests today, he says. They did not have to lead souls towards God. They were the caste that looked after the material interests of the so-called gods. And this is for those of you who've ever been to Rome, to the Vatican, who have spent some time in Europe. If you have any understanding of how the Catholic Church operates, then you know that this was exactly what they were tasked to do, is simply to look after the material wealth of the church. But were they looking after the material wealth of the church or of Yahweh, the Elohim, a leader of the Elohim, if you will? Again, for this, we have to begin thinking in different terms. According to this scholar, like I said in the beginning, God does not appear. God, this omnipotent, omnipresent figure that created everything, that transcends everything, does not appear in the Bible a single time in all the texts that he's analyzed. This is the most shocking thing you could possibly hear about the Bible. Now, in the same breath, he says that doesn't mean that such an entity does not exist. He simply does not exist in the Bible. So what would that do? Imagine, what would that do if this became common knowledge, common discussion, that the entity that is directing and that has called for sacrifices and that has called for submission, that has called for wars, murders, killings, was never, ever our original creator, but was the Lord of this world, the Lord of this realm here, Yahweh, not God, Yahweh, a male warrior of the Elohim. So what happens if we look at it that way? And the only thing you have to do is to read it literal. And we're going to go deeper into the origins of the words, how they were translated, what Genesis really says. Let me spoiler alert here. Genesis does not say in the beginning of creation. That's not what Genesis says. Genesis says this is where this story begins, kind of like a fairy tale. Once upon a time. It doesn't say in the beginning of creation. And we're going to go through that. We're going to go of the misinterpretation of the Garden Eden, how that was misconstrued and misread, mistranslated, and on purpose the story of the ultimate, the original sin, the eating of the apple, according to Bellini, it never happened in the Bible. It's not true. It's not what happened. It's not what happened if we look at this as a historical text properly translated. So we're going to go deeper into this. I want to keep it at a digestible level. And I want to say once again, like him, I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm just saying this is what we're discovering. I do think, and I've thought this and believed this long before I discovered this book, that we are nearing the end of religions the way we as we know them, for various reasons. But the answer to that, according to these wannabe elites, is a new religion. It's the ultimate answer, a Luciferian religion, and it will at the right time be presented as a solution. That's not what I believe, by the way. That's not where I'm standing. I think that when we truly return to an understanding of who we really are, while we're here, we will have our original relationship with our Creator again. It will be one of, I think, fairly direct communication. It will be one based on a lot of clarity and logic and common sense, and I think it will be much more beautiful than it is now. But this is the first part of the end of religion as we know it, and I look forward to discussing the rest of it. By the way, if you want to kind of jump ahead, get this book. I can only recommend it. It's great reading material, very non-dogmatic, doesn't want to persuade you, just gives you certain facts. And we'll be back with you again very, very soon here to go deeper into this. So, my friends, I hope that, on the other side of this, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you do not subscribe to any other religion, we can still be united in our quest for freedom and the truth. Much love and many blessings. We'll be back with you again very, very soon.